the idea of the world population as a superorganism, it's worth thinking about seriously, because it suggests that maybe the only regime that will prevent it from destroying itself is fascistic. I don't want to believe that.
Bonjour à tous, je voulais dire un petit mot pour présenter mon invité. Dennett est un philosophe, un scientifique et un professeur américain né en 1942, et c'est l'un des penseurs les plus influents au monde. Dennett a écrit de manière intensive sur des sujets tels que la théorie de l'évolution, la nature de la conscience, le libre arbitre, la religion, l'intelligence artificielle et plus globalement sur les relations entre la philosophie et la science. Je vous souhaite une bonne année et une excellente écoute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dennett, for taking the time to exchange. It's a real pleasure to have you on the show. Charles Darwin holds a really special place in your work. I'm
Yes.
going to start by a very broad question. Could you describe how Darwin revolutionized our understanding of the world, and how did it influence your work?
Yes, as I've said, if I could give a prize for the best idea anybody ever had, I'd give it to Darwin, because he came up with the idea that unites all of life and all of culture and all of meaning with physics and cosmology. And it's as one of his early critics said, it's a strange inversion of reasoning, but it's reasonable, it's true, it's brilliant, and it's the idea that we start with no meaning, no purpose, no value, but sheer chaos and physics ultimately leads to the creation of replicators. And replicators make more copies of themselves, and those that replicate the best make the most, and this is the birth of meaning, because this is the birth of in a way striving to exist. And from the very first replicators, we can now look back and detect a purpose, not in any magical sense, in the very simple sense that this construction of atoms exists in this shape because it is better at helping these replicators replicate than alternatives would be. And from that, over billions of years, and it took billions of years of natural selection, we get minds, we get nervous systems, we get brains. And if you look down at the microscopic level, at the subcellular level, you find each individual cell is a living thing, and it has its metabolism, and it's composed of literally thousands of tinier machines. It's little robots all the way down. Even the ribosome, without which cell division and reproduction could not happen, the replication of DNA, all of these design brilliances are the products of natural selection. And one of the other lessons of Darwin is that everything of any interest evolves gradually. There are no bright lines in nature. The line between living and not living is not bright. There are viruses and macromolecules and other interesting organelles that do they count as alive, or are they just proteins aren't alive, are they? Well, some people would say, well, sort of. So there are no bright lines there for consciousness. or I might add for free will. So all the meaning that there is in the world, perfectly real, but it's not absolute, and there's no sharp dividing line. Meaning starts when evolution starts. And the meaning of poetry, the meaning of law, the meaning of philosophy, the meaning of science, all of these meanings are fruits on the tree of life.
You are one of the most known thinkers on the topic of consciousness. First, can we even define consciousness? And in your opinion, how did consciousness arise?
Defining consciousness is the same problem as defining life. It's complicated. And rather than wasting precious years honing a perfect counterexample proof definition, we should accept that consciousness is itself a complex of many things. As I like to say, consciousness is real, it just isn't what you think it is. It's not magic. It's not something that divides the universe in two, the conscious things and the unconscious things. There's all sorts of intermediate cases, and as with life. So philosophers love to start a discussion by saying, define your terms. And I say, no, define your terms if you must after you've circled around and surveyed the phenomena and seen what the options are. And then if you still think you need a definition, go ahead and try, but don't waste a lot of time on it. Most biologists wouldn't bother defining life. They think they know what it is, and they do. And they're dealing with putative counterexamples is mostly a waste of time. Sometimes it's very valuable to see what the exceptions, what the outliers, what the penumbral cases are.
Si tu apprécies cette chaîne, pense à t'abonner et à activer la cloche. N'hésite pas à donner de la visibilité à cette vidéo en la likant, en la partageant ou en la commentant. La Fabrique Sociale est un média indépendant et a grand besoin de soutien financier. Si tu en as les moyens, n'hésite pas à faire un don sur ma page Tipeee. Même les petits gestes sont très importants pour la survie de cette chaîne. Le lien est disponible dans les notes et dans les...
It seems like attention is a major component of consciousness. How do you think about attention, and is it a fundamental aspect of human consciousness, in your opinion?
Yes, certainly attention is a fundamental aspect, because consciousness, as I understand it, is human consciousness especially, is the arena of self-control. It's, if we think of ourselves as agents, we have many, many degrees of freedom to control. Not only do I run, do I walk, do I lie down, do I feed, do I fight, but what do I think about next? Do I play the piano? Do I go to war? We have uncountably many choices to make. Those are all degrees of freedom. We have control systems that have to manage all of that. And there is no algorithm, there is no recipe for perfect management. There are software systems in general, they have operating systems which settle in advance exactly what will happen next for one reason or another. That's fundamentally unlike the way our brains work. Our brains are composed of quasi-agents, proto-agents that have agendas, that interact, that cooperate, that collaborate, sometimes that compete very strongly within us. And out of that competition comes a history of control and memory. And that's what consciousness is. It's the settling of all of those conflicts and disputes. And so consciousness is the emergence. What happens in consciousness is the emergence of different themes and contents that have struggled for influence, or as I say, fame in the brain, for celebrity, cerebral celebrity, and that temporarily are in control and then can recede into the background. If somebody wants to control you, the way to control you is to control your attention, because that blocks most of the degrees of freedom you have. It clamps them. And clamping degrees of freedom is the way other agents try to control us, by distracting our attention and by riveting our attention on particular items. That's why we're now living in an attention economy. There is nothing more valuable to you and to those on the outside than your attention. And great effort is being expended in attracting and holding your attention. And that's what makes consciousness the important phenomenon it is.
If you had to tell, what will be the biggest contributions that you made to the field of consciousness?
Well, I think destroying the illusion of the Cartesian theater. Descartes imagined that it all funneled up to the pineal gland, and then that was the intermediary to the non-physical mind. That's wrong. I think Descartes even sort of knew it was wrong. But if you replace dualism with materialism, then you also have to get rid of the apex, the central place where it all comes together. There's no place other than the whole brain, including large parts of the nervous system spread throughout the body. That's where it all comes together. And it doesn't come together for a movie in your head. That idea, however, is attractive. It's eternally seductive. And the belief that you have this private theater in your head where everything happens, where your dreams and your private thoughts happen, well, there's a sense in which it's true. Yes, of course. But the idea that you can localize it in the brain and find a place where it all comes together, where there's a different medium, as some people have thought, of consciousness in the brain, some special tissue or something. No, there's no wonder tissue. There's no finish line. There's no entrance into consciousness that makes for some great phase shift. That's an idea that is very hard for people to accept, but I have been unrelenting in my criticism of the idea, and I think many people are getting the point now and are seeing that they want to avoid the inner witness in the Cartesian theater. That's a non-solution to the problem of consciousness.
Does it mean that the feeling of self, what we sometimes call the I, is an illusion? And if so, why?
Well, it's an illusion in a good sense. It's a user illusion. It's the believer of your beliefs, the holder of your opinions. It's the author of your speech acts. It's the decider of your deeds, and that's what you do. And there's this personal level. You say, this is something I do. This is something I've just done. This is something I will do. Now, sometimes in something like the alien hand phenomenon, where all of a sudden you find your hand doing something that you didn't intend, didn't want, that's very distressing. It's very upsetting. And you say, no, that's not me. That's not. And there's an important sense in which it isn't, because it's not being controlled by the consortium of robots that are in your head that represent yourself, which is it's an idealized notion. It's a oversimplified notion, but it's a very powerful one.
In his book, The Selfish Gene, Richard Dawkins coined the term meme. Could you explain what is a meme and why is it an important concept to understand, especially in our social media, hyper-information world?
What Richard realized, he wasn't the first, but he was the one who made it most vivid, is that evolution occurs whenever there is high-quality replication, mutation, and selection. You don't have to be alive to evolve. Now, that's not controversial. Viruses are not alive, and they evolve. There's no question. They are prime examples of evolving entities. Natural selection is the theory you need to use to understand viruses, as we know. Everybody should know that now. But viruses aren't the only non-living evolvers. Cultural items also evolve. Ideas, ways of making things, fashions, tunes, and most importantly, words. Words, you're not born with words. They're not innate. Words are culturally transmitted, and words evolve over time. Words go extinct. Words mutate. They change their meanings. They change their pronunciations. They jump from language to language. And natural selection explains all of this. Sometimes people coin terms. Sometimes people intelligently design a new word and it sticks. Meme is a good example. Dawkins coined it and it stuck. But of course, it sort of changed its meaning since he defined it. But it's evolved too. But we have to understand that cultural items are brilliantly designed, just the way wings of birds and the eye of the eagle and the fins of the dolphin are brilliantly designed by a process which is not itself intelligent or purposeful, by natural selection. So most cultural items are a mixture of natural selection uncontaminated by intelligent design or purposeful, meaningful, deliberate design. Nobody invented language. No, nobody invented the wheel. The wheel evolved from wheel-like predecessors. And sometimes people got a good idea, and sometimes they got a bad idea. And the reason wheels are round, not hexagonal, is not due to the brilliance of some original wheel designer, but to the fact that that's just good design. And other shapes of wheels, with a few interesting exceptions, are not well designed. So if we see the world of human culture, including science, including religion, including art, music, poetry, if we see these as the products of several different kinds of natural selection, genetic natural selection at the base, with cultural natural selection on top of it, then you can see coevolution between the two. Lactose intolerance in adult human beings is now genetically established in a large part of the human population, the part of the human population whose ancestors grew up in agricultural communities where dairying, where milk cows were used. Otherwise it's unnatural. Weaning usually stops the capacity to digest raw milk, but not in many human beings. Now, there are no genes for herding dairy cows, but there are genes for drinking the milk produced by the cows that are herded, because that's a cultural practice that's been established. That's just one example among many. And when we look, for instance, at language, we can see now that language evolved gradually out of proto-languages, out of systems which were inferior communication systems. They're a technology, as Daniel Dorr says in his wonderful book, The Instruction of Imagination. They're a technology that's evolved over time with a lot of the innovation unrecognized, unnoticed, and unplanned by the human beings who adjusted their practices. Languages evolve.
You mentioned religion. Religion and belief systems are a great interest of yours. How do you think about religion? Can it be explained as a natural phenomenon? And why is it important to understand religion in the 21st century?
It's important to understand religion because it's so important to so many people. If we look around the world today, nothing could be more obvious. And if we get it wrong, shame on us. We should study religion as a natural phenomenon so we understand why it works the way it works, why it has such a hold on people. And we have to do it using all the tools and methods, peer review, double-blind experiments, objective methods of science. We can't leave the study of religion to partisans, to theologians. We have to study religion historically, but with the same emphasis on fact gathering that archaeologists and biologists, paleontologists use. Religion has a history, it can be studied, and we have a moral obligation to study religion scientifically, naturalistically. Once we do that, I think some of the features of religion are very clear. Religion started out as I would say, a synanthropic meme. That is, these were cultural practices which thrived in human company, but were not yet necessarily owned or domesticated by people. They were like squirrels and house mice and rats and bed bugs. They thrived in human company and depended on human beings to be their vectors, but they didn't serve human purposes. They served their own purposes. They had their own fitness. That's the key to mimetic evolution. Memes have their own fitness. Some evolved better than others. But as they evolved, what happened was that different communities developed different imaginary beings, sprites, elves, goblins, ghosts. Polytheism, as it were, came first with lots of imaginary beings. And the reason for this was simply the overextension of what I call the intentional stance. Something surprising happens, and the first question that comes to your mind is, who's there? Who? Not what, but who's there? There's an agent there. And we think because it might be important. Maybe there's an agent there that is looking at me, or that wants me, or that wants to do something to me or for me. And these are very attractive ideas, and they stick in our heads. And pretty soon, the local menagerie of imaginary beings grows. And those are the gods that start. And don't ask what this is for. What are the mice for? What are the squirrels for? What are the bed bugs for? They survive because they can, because they're fitter. But then they get domesticated. In the same way that dogs became domesticated from wolves. And when they become domesticated, then they start being for things for us. And that's where the deliberate and foresightful attempts to breed better ideas, better doctrines comes in. That's where you get the growth of organized religion. And but who was it designed to help? Well, sometimes it was designed to help the kings and priests, and to give them power. It was a political force to wield. And then others resisted that. So the whole history of the growth and extinction of religions, we have to remember that many more religions have gone extinct than exist today. It's just like in biology. Most of the species that have ever existed are extinct. Most of the religions that have ever existed are extinct. Why do those that survive hang on? Why are there not large pockets of believers in Thor or Zoroaster, to name two obvious examples? Those religions are extinct, but we have good fossil traces of them. If we think about religion in this way, we can understand how it has helped us and how it has hurt us. It is neither a wonderful blessing, a wonderful gift that we should all treasure, nor is it a scourge. It's a mixture. And the process of redesigning religion is going on all the time. Religion has changed more in the last 100 years than it changed in the last 1,000 years. It's probably changed more in the last 10 years than in the 100 years before that. So we have an accelerating examination and re-examination and reconsideration of what makes a religion good or bad. And we've learned that there are some toxic, dangerous strains of religion out there. And we can understand why they are so attractive to so many people. And we can understand how difficult it will be for those people to abandon those practices, which we now can recognize as toxic. It's much harder than giving up smoking or drinking or drugs, but it has to be done. I compare it in my book on religion and breaking the spell. I compare it to my love of music. If science proved to me tomorrow that music was a bad thing, that you shouldn't raise your children in a house full of music, I would hate that. I would say, no. A world without music is not a world I want to live in. That's how much I love music. Well, I can understand that some people feel that way about Islam or about Judaism or about Hinduism or about Roman Catholicism. It's who they are. That's who they are, and that's what they love. They don't want to see it change, and they don't want to see it evaporate. But evolution is happening. It's going to change. It's going to evaporate. And what we can do is, with sympathy, with empathy, we can help people avoid the trials and ordeals of apostasy, of giving up things that they hold so dear.
To bounce back on the topic of music, I think personally that you grew up in a very interesting and fascinating era of music and cultural development.
I was very lucky to have that in my upbringing, yes.
It's been almost 20 years since Facebook was created, and now we use social media as kind of a meta media, a platform that curates all the information in the world with tremendous repercussions. What do you think about social media and the way these platforms changed our information ecosystem?
I think there's some very great dangers. At first, I thought it was going to be largely benign, and that the transparency made possible the giving everybody a voice in a way through their cell phones and their social media was a great thing. But then Deb Roy and I wrote a paper in Scientific American about the new transparency, and we said this is dangerous. It's a two-edged sword, and I think, in fact, the dangers now loom very large. I had never been part of Facebook. I always found it repellent, but I have been on Twitter. But I've since abandoned Twitter. I think it is a force for evil now. It is. I think we have to rethink our reliance on it. And if you go back to that article that Deb Roy and I wrote, we said every institution in the world is going to have to redesign itself to deal with the new transparency. And transparency is not an unalloyed blessing, because privacy is important as well. And when privacy disappears, as it largely has, then we can see that we no longer have the autonomy. We can now be tracked and traced and influenced. Our attention can be captured and so forth. So we're living in a rapidly evolving virtual world that we need to study carefully, discover the dangers, and we're going to need legislation to rein it in. And we can't have just the Wild West here. It's much too dangerous. I am wholly behind the so-called doomsayers about AI and about social media. We have to rethink our priorities very carefully.
We're going to talk about AI a bit later. What will be your definition of truth, and how can we find truth in what more and more people call a post-epistemic world?
Yeah, post-epistemic world. A phrase I hate. I think that's one of the most dangerous epithets I've heard as a term for the Anthropocene, as some people say, the world of the biological era of anthropos, of human beings. Now, post-epistemic is really would be tragic, because no sooner do we get a really good nervous system for the whole planet than we start to pollute it and throw away truth. And partly I blame the postmodernists. I think they poisoned a lot of minds with the idea that truth is all relative and subjective. There's no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as capital T truth, the view from nowhere, the absolute truth. But there's all sorts of mundane truth. Anybody who doesn't believe that, I want to ask them, do you drive a car? Do you know how many truths had to be known to make a car? Just about where the parts went and what size they were and how they were welded together and what color they were. And you can't have technology without truth. And we all depend on technology and say there's no role for truth is breathtakingly disingenuous. It's ludicrous. People say, well, science is not the absolute truth. No, but it's the best we can do. And in fact, if other institutions were as good at self-policing as science is, we'd be in great shape. I mean, we don't see religions discovering when, for instance, religious people point to scandals in science, of which there are, of course, quite a few. I say, right, how do you know about those? Because science uncovered them. You didn't uncover them. Science uncovered its own flaws. It displays its own flaws. It has trouble doing that. It is hard because sometimes they have to grit their teeth and admit a terrible mistake or a terrible, even evil deception on the part of some scientists. But science has self-correcting mechanisms. Politics and religion don't. History as a science, as a Wissenschaft, it's not a natural science, but it's a Wissenschaft. It's a way of knowing, and they patrol themselves and they correct themselves, and it's the mutual agreement to correct each other's errors. That's the most firm foundation in the world, and one of the real dangers of large language models like ChatGPT is that they do not have the integrity, they do not have the commitment to truth-telling that we expect of our fellow human beings.
To bounce back on that, is there a difference between a biological brain and a supercomputer? And in your opinion, can we teach AI to learn human values such as compassion and a sense of fairness?
Yes and no. In principle, yes. In principle, we could make an AI that was a person. It was not a human being, not a biological person, but was a person with all the rights and responsibilities of a person. You could vote and make contracts and travel if it's a robot. Certainly, because after all, that's what we are. We're robots made of robots, made of robots, made of robots. We're just very, very special robots. We don't have any magical ingredients. There's nothing in biology. There's nothing in carbon or in protein that is in principle not replicable in an AI. But should we do that? I was saying no, we shouldn't, because persons have autonomy, and that makes them dangerous. That's why we have moral education. That's why we have law and order. That's why we have responsibility and punishment. And until we don't want to make AIs that can't be subject themselves, not their owners, but themselves, to the law and to condemnation and to blame. These are important features of what's evolved in civilization. And AIs, as currently envisaged, do not have the vulnerabilities, the fragilities that human beings have that are so important. They don't have skin in the game, as one says, and that's very important. We should make them. My friend and colleague Joanna Bryson has a paper which is called "Robots Should Be Slaves," and what she means is they shouldn't be persons. They should be the sort of thing that it's okay to take apart and throw in the closet and dismantle and adjust. We don't want them to have rights. They can be agents of sorts, but don't give them what is possible in principle, the autonomy and fragility of people, because then we should treat them as people. And they have a certain sort of immortality that we don't have. Why? Because ultimately they're digital. They can be, their entire design can be copied, digitally copied, and you could perfectly clone them. And that is something we can't do. And it's very much a part of our human predicament. And we don't want to create things like the sorcerer's apprentice creates all those broomsticks that then run around autonomously. That's the danger that we face.
What do you think is the biggest threat that poses AI to society right now?
Well, biggest or most immediate. I think the most immediate threat is counterfeit people. That is to say, that if now we're spending more and more time online dealing with digital worlds, and it's becoming easier and easier to create agents that masquerade as people and that are treated as people, and people take advice from them and give their life savings to them and allow themselves to be hoodwinked and beguiled and charmed and persuaded by these fake people. I think counterfeit people are more dangerous than counterfeit money, and that we have to pass laws that make it a very serious crime to spread counterfeit people.
Today, it seems like only international cooperation and coordination can help us face global challenges like climate change or AI, but it seems very difficult to enact. And some people think of our global society as a biological organism. The American scientist Nate Higgins calls it a superorganism. Is that a good analogy? And in your opinion, can this analogy help us build better coordination mechanisms in the future?
I think it's, in some regards, good, but in general, it's dangerous, because the superorganism is is composed of entities that have their own rights and agendas and hopes and fears. I am very fond of saying that a human being, you, me, I am composed of trillions of little agents, billions of cells, maybe 1 trillion cells, and then a lot of them aren't even human cells, more non-human living cells inside my clothes than human cells. So here's this tremendous conglomeration of different living things that make me. Now, that's wonderful. It's amazing. It's true. It's also the case that I couldn't go on existing if there weren't ruthless, one might almost say fascistic, control systems operating there. If you think of the cartoon movie Ants, with Woody Allen playing the rebel ant, the voice of it, that was a very ant colonies are a very fascistic society. No room for individuals there, and that's what you have to have. You have to have serious. It's a police state inside your body. Your immune system is attacking things all the time. Sometimes it attacks the wrong things. Sometimes in autoimmune disorders, it attacks some of the good guys. But it's not a benign picture in some regards. So the idea of the world population as a superorganism, it's worth thinking about seriously, because it suggests that maybe the only regime that will prevent it from destroying itself is fascistic. I don't want to believe that. I hope that's false. And I think we're better to bumble along with our democracies and our civil rights and our equalities and our and we should strive for that instead. And look what it's given us. It's given us the civilization that has given us modern science. Secular, rational, democratic, non-authoritarian. It's all been good, or that's all been good. I think so. My views on that are that we're better off to preserve democracy if we can and spread it. And if that leads to a less efficient superorganism, so be it.
Yeah. My last question may be not the easiest one, but through your career, you studied a lot of ideas, you met a lot of brilliant people, and you have written about your personal journey in your last book, I've Been Thinking. So you're in a very interesting position to answer what may be, I don't know, the ultimate question. What's the meaning of life?
There are many meanings of life. And I think that I have been incredibly fortunate to have the opportunity and the time and the resources to reflect on all these prospects. And a lot of my fellow human beings haven't. The meaning of life for a subsistence farmer is very clear. Find enough food for self and family. Try to stay healthy. The goal of most lives of living things is simply to reproduce and have more progeny, as Monod said. The dream of every cell is to become two cells. And the dream of every tree is to make more trees. And apple trees make apple trees. And fish make fish. We are the only species on the planet that has, thanks to culture, that has found a vantage point to consider other options. Many of us forego offspring, biological offspring, because we prefer to contribute to the cultural offspring that we have benefited from. And this opens up thousands, hundreds of projects that add to the excellence of the world. The world is full of excellent things, excellent music, excellent science, excellent cars, excellent knives, excellent bombs, excellent art and poetry. And to contribute to that, to make a little goodness, that's the meaning of life.
Mr. Dennett, thank you very much for your time. It's an honor to talk with you, and I'm sure your deep insights will be very valuable to the listeners.
Very good. I'm glad you talked with me, and you'll make this available with subtitles, and do send me the link when it's ready.